Well, indeed, it's a blessing to be with you today. I appreciate all of you for being here with us this morning. I appreciate the concern you've shown on behalf of Sydney Jane. She's improving and doing well, and we appreciate you asking on her behalf. It is the Thanksgiving season, beginning the holiday season as we know it. Thursday, of course, is Thanksgiving. And it might look different than it has in years past. And for that, I'm greatly disappointed. You can mess with my sporting events, my work, my daily routine. You can make it more difficult to go to the store, to go to Lowe's, to get gas. You can do all of those things, but don't mess with Thanksgiving dinner. And yet, here we are. Here we are. These things are reaching into every aspect of our lives. And the effect of the pandemic on our holiday season is unavoidable. Maybe some of your get-togethers will be smaller in number. Maybe they'll be closer to home. Maybe you won't travel or people won't travel to you. Maybe you've opted to do nothing at all. I don't know. But various people find themselves in various situations. And it's unfortunate and it's disappointing. But here we are. And there's not a lot that we can do about it except to make it through each day the best we can. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 15, there's a very simple statement made. And that statement really underscores what I hope that we can focus on as we move through these coming days and weeks. And in particular, as we stop and as we pause, like we should do regularly, but sadly, like we may only find ourselves doing this next Thursday, as we pause to reflect and give thanks. What a simple statement is found in 2 Corinthians 9:15. Thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. It may seem that that statement sort of comes out of nowhere as you're reading through 2 Corinthians. In fact, I read a commentator who essentially said just that. He said, Paul is accustomed to just randomly giving thanks in the midst of his epistles. Well, maybe that's true, and if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't believe it's there randomly. I believe that what we have here is a statement that serves a purpose in the context in which it's given. By inspiration, Paul placed that statement there in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 15, and I believe it fits. And what I would like to do this morning is I would like to focus on what 2 Corinthians 9:15 is doing there, I believe, what it does, the purpose that it serves, and what you and I can take from this verse as we move into the Thanksgiving holiday, as we move through the holiday season, and as we continue to navigate these strange times. Number one, as we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 15, and as we try to place it in its context, what we, I believe, see is that this verse serves as a connection between giving, and that's chapters 8 and 9, and living, and that's chapter 10. Here is my statement to you this morning relative to that. The same things that can help us be thankful can help us be faithful. The same things that can help us glorify God can help us live lives pleasing to God. And so as we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and some will go back to 2 Corinthians 8 in the broader context, and as we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10, we see some similarities between giving and living. And both of these things revolve around that statement, thanks be unto God for His unspeakable gift. You see, if we're going to be thankful in terms of our giving, it requires some things. Number one, it requires a foundation of positivity. Look in regards to giving in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 2. Now let's set the stage here. Paul is taking up a collection for the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem who have endured great persecution. Many of them have lost their jobs, their livelihoods. Many of them are in danger of losing their very lives. And so Paul is going out to the Gentile churches at large and saying, can you take up collections for your Jewish Christian brethren? And this will serve two purposes. Number one, it will provide for them. And number two, it will show unity between those of different backgrounds in Christ. And so that's what's going on. But look in verse 2 of 2 Corinthians 9. He says, for I know the forwardness of your mind, for that which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, that's the region of Corinth, and your zeal has provoked very many. Paul makes a conscious decision to be positive as he begins his discussion with the Corinthians. Look, I know that you want to give. I know that it's in your mind to give. And regardless of what may or may not have been done yet, let's start with the positive. And what a lesson for us. But look at 2 Corinthians 10. He does the same thing about their living. Look at verse 15. He's been talking about their battle between living according to the flesh and living according to the Spirit, between the carnal and the spiritual. And in verse 15, he says, not boasting of things without our measure, that is, of other men's labors, but having hope that when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by you according to our rule abundantly. Paul says, I choose to have hope that you will respond positively. Notice that Paul is making a concerted effort, a conscious decision to be positive. Dear friends, today, if we're going to be thankful, it's a conscious decision. We've got to choose to focus on reasons to be thankful. Fast forward to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. You remember that Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh. What did he call it? He called it the messenger of Satan. And what was it sent to do? To buffet him, to beat him up, to challenge him. You see, Satan has many messengers in our lives, and their goal is to force us to look at life negatively, to neglect our blessings, to not be thankful and grateful. And one of the things that Satan has been so good at, it seems lately, is to provide reasons for us to lose sight of what's good in life and reasons to be thankful. Dear friends, if you and I are to be thankful today, it's a choice. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. Mark was telling me just before services some challenges he had last weekend camping. If you've ever been camping, there always are challenges that accompany those situations, right? We understand that. We realize that. And I think the overarching point that Mark was making was it was one relatively small thing and one little bit larger thing and another thing, and these things mounded up, and before long he was irritated and there was angst. And as he was saying that, I reflected on a moment in my life just yesterday. I was in the car and I was driving, and I was in Cookeville, and I decided to go to Chick-fil-A. And Chick-fil-A was wrapped up as it always is, right? And you can't go in now. It's just drive-through. And there were literally 3 lanes of drive-through. 3 lanes. I went in the wrong direction, and I had to drive around the building. Okay? There was actually a young man in a red shirt directing traffic in the Chick-fil-A parking lot. Okay? I wait for 15 minutes, and I get my chicken nuggets. And I'm driving on the road and eating my chicken nuggets. And of course, what happens? Polynesian sauce on the chicken nugget in my lap. There it is. And I found myself so distraught, so irritated. Part of that chicken nugget fell between the seat and the console, never to be seen again. And what was my response? Anger, frustration, irritation. I've sat in this parking lot for 15 minutes. I've dropped my chicken nugget. I've stained my pants. And then this cheesy song came on the radio. Everything is going to be okay, was the title of that song. And I thought, providence. Providence. But you see, I had to make a conscious choice. Am I going to be negative right now? Am I going to allow these tiny things to needle me into looking at life from a negative viewpoint, or am I going to choose positivity? What am I going to do? You see, and as the days unfold over the coming week, you can make a choice too. You can choose to allow these things to cause you to complain and gripe and moan about all the things you can't do and all the things we don't have and all the ways this is different. Or you can choose positivity. Paul has got a lot of challenging things left to say to the Corinthians, but he chooses positivity at first. Concerning giving and concerning living. He starts with positivity. Can we do the same? Number 2, a challenge to sacrifice. Dear friends, if we are going to be thankful, and we're going to see Paul discuss this relative to giving and to living, we need to understand the principle of sacrifice. Look at chapter 9 again. Look at verse 11. Again, Paul is talking about the collection for the saints, and he says, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. In verse 13, while by the experiment of this ministration they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ and for your liberal distribution unto them and to all men. Bountifulness and liberal distribution, both of those have to do with giving sincerely, without self-seeking. It has to do with selfless generosity. The foundation of godly giving is sacrifice. And understanding that it's a selfless act. Well, let's fast forward to chapter 10. And Paul says there's a battle going on between the carnal and between the spiritual. And the weapons of our warfare are not physical, but they are spiritual. There's a battle going on inside of us, and it's a spiritual battle. How do we live our lives each day? The decisions that we make every day, that's a spiritual battle going on inside of all of us, each of us, every single day. Chapter 10, and pick up in verse 5. Paul says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. The picture there is of an army storming out to battle. And as they defeat the enemy, they take all of those enemies captive and they put them in chains and they bring them back. And Paul says that's a picture of our spiritual life every day. It's about putting to death those things that would hinder us, taking captive all of our decisions and actions and our will, and sacrificing it all to God. That's what a spiritual life looks like. Sacrifice in giving, sacrifice in living. And dear friends, who is the most thankful but those who have given the most? Veterans Day was just recently celebrated in this country. Who is the most thankful on such a day but the ones who have done it? The ones who have given. And the more we have given, the more we recognize days like that. Dear friends, maybe you look at your life and you say, well, I'm not very thankful for what God has done to me. Well, maybe we've not given enough. Maybe we've not sacrificed ourselves to the level we should. And maybe that would change our perspective. Thanksgiving requires a foundation of positivity. Number 2, a challenge to sacrifice. And number 3, a reliance on God. Look at chapter 9 and pick up again in this discussion on giving. He said, God is able to make all grace abound towards you. Notice who is able. And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work, as it is written, He, God, has dispersed abroad. He, God, has given to the poor. His, God's righteousness remaineth forever. Now He that ministereth seed to the sower, both ministers bread for your food, multiplies your seed sown, and increases the fruit of your righteousness. A reliance on God. Dear friends, God provides the opportunity and the protection for giving. Notice, God is able to make all grace abound towards you. God provides the opportunity. And then it continues to say that it's God who enriches, verse 11, in everything to all bountifulness. God gives you the opportunity to give, and He protects what you have so that you can give. Do you know what a blessing it is to be able to give? Think about that. Danielle saw on social media just the other day, some celebrity went and he had a meal, and the meal was like $34. And he wrote the check, filled out the credit card statement for $2,034. He left a $2,000 tip. Now, I don't know if any of us here are generally ever able to do that. Maybe we will never be able to do it. Maybe we'll just choose not to use our money in a different way. But that's a blessing, isn't it? I hope if someone's able to sit down and write a tip to a random person for $2,000, that they understand just what opportunity God has given them to have that much. It's a blessing from God. As you sit down and you count your blessings over the next several days, Lord willing, if you're able to sit down at a table with those you love and you're able to partake of food and friendship and fellowship with them, recognize that it's God who's given you the opportunity. We need to understand that. In chapter 10, the opportunity to live a godly life is given by God as well. Look at verse 12. For we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves, comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. But we will not boast of things without our measure, according to the measure of the rule which God has distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. Paul says God has given us the standard. He's given us the opportunity to be faithful to Him, and He's given us a measuring stick to measure our lives by. And that opportunity comes from God. Dear friend, as we look at our lives, as we sit down and we enjoy time with each other, as we reflect on the things we're thankful for, aren't we thankful that God has given us a standard to live by? And God has done that. He's given us a measuring stick by which we can measure our lives. God provides the opportunity, and He provides the protection for us to make use of that opportunity. So as we think about 2 Corinthians 9:15, it connects a discussion on giving and a discussion on living. And we see so many similarities there. And all of those things go back to thankfulness. Number 2. This verse serves as a contrast between our giving and God's giving. I want you to look again at 2 Corinthians 9:15. Thanks be unto God for His unspeakable gift. Now, what's Paul been talking about for 2 chapters? He's been talking about Christians giving. And you see, the Christians had all kinds of trouble giving. I told you that Paul wanted to be positive, but there were problems. What problems were there that existed in the Corinthian church and really exist with everyone who seeks to give? Number 1, there's the follow-through. Go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And we've already read verse 2 where he says, For I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia, that is Corinth, was ready a year ago, and your zeal has provoked many. He said, you told me you were going to give a year ago. But notice what he continues to say. Yet have I sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this behalf, that as I said, you may be ready. Lest haply if they of Macedonia come with me and find you unprepared. You know what the danger was? They had talked about giving. They had intended to give, but they hadn't given. Nobody here has ever done anything like that, have you? Intended to and never done. You know, in just a month and a half or so, it will be New Year's. And some of us will make New Year's resolutions. And we will have the best of intentions. But how many of those intentions will just flutter away as the first few months of the new calendar come through? You see, when it comes to our giving, it's dependent, number one, on our follow-through. We may have the best of intentions and just not do it. And the Corinthian church, they had intended to give. They wanted to give. It was in their mind to give. But Paul says, if I send people to you, the danger is that you've not taken up the collection, that you've intended to do it and have not done it. And then you will fail us. Number two, maybe we'll get there and you will have given, but your attitude will be all wrong. Oh, Paul's coming, we've got to give. All right, come on everybody, let's give. How many of you feel that way about the holiday get-togethers? Time to go to Aunt Jane's again. Oh no. I can't believe we're going to have to go through all of this. You know, I remember being a young man and going to some of these places, and all I can remember is the way the house smelled, you know. And oh, we got to do this or we got to do that. And sometimes when we're young, we don't understand the significance of what we're doing. And our heart's not in the right place. But I just want you to understand, and I didn't intend to say this, is in particular you young people, you have a limited number of occasions to be with the ones you love. Celebrate it. Be thankful for it. You see, Corinth's heart wasn't right. I know that because of what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And look at verse 6. But this I say, he which sows sparingly shall reap sparingly. He which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. See, one of the foundations of giving when it comes to humans giving is that sometimes our attitude isn't right and we go through the motions, but we don't really mean it. It's not sincere. But I want you to compare Corinth's issues with giving with God's giving. Look again at 2 Corinthians 9:15. Thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. Unspeakable. That word unspeakable is pretty well self-explanatory. It means not expounded in full, indescribable. Paul is struck by the magnitude of what God has given. The word gift there comes from the root word that means sacrifice. And notice he doesn't say, thanks be to God for His unspeakable gifts. Now, God has given us many gifts, right? But he says, thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. What does Paul have in mind here? The gift of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God for His gift, which is of such great magnitude that I can't even describe it. We give and it's because we have to, and we go through the motions of our giving and our doing and our being. And sometimes we mean to and we don't. But God never forgets. God never fails to do what He said He's going to do. He never fails to follow through on what He's promised. And when He gives, you can't describe it because of its magnitude. Thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. At some point, maybe many of you will sit down and maybe you'll write a list of all the things you're thankful for. That's always a good exercise, isn't it? Maybe you'll listen to your kids as they pray for all the things they're thankful for. Sladen told us many of the things that his children are thankful for, and sometimes it's entertaining, the things that they pray for. But it's a childlike simplicity, right? Because what they understand is everything that they see and everything that they experience is rooted in God. And we forget that. We absolutely forget that. But as we write down or as we focus on, as we dwell upon all of the things that we're thankful for, at the top of the list is God's unspeakable gift, which is so much different than anything we could ever give. Number 3, this statement also has in it something that we might not notice in a cursory study of this verse. There is a concession. about grace. Now you say, where does grace show up in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 15? The word thanks comes from the Greek word C-H-R-I-S, charis, which is the Greek word translated grace. Some 127 times, I think, in the New Testament it's translated grace. Vastly more than it's translated anything else. But it's also translated sometimes thanks. So grace and thanksgiving are intimately connected. And I found it so interesting just how often grace, that word charis, shows up in chapters 8 through 10. It shows up in chapter 8 and verse 1 as the opportunity to give. Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit, or make you to know of the grace, the opportunity bestowed on the churches of Macedonia to give. Chapter 8 and verse 4, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering of the saints. That word gift there as well. Chapter 8 and verse 6 and 7, insomuch that we desired Titus that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. He says, Corinth, I want you to finish your grace, which is the action of giving, connected to the attitude. Chapter 8 and verse 9, I want you to notice, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sakes He became poor, that ye through His poverty might be rich. You see, it's no mistake that Paul uses the word grace over and over and over in so many different contexts. He's bringing us towards grace, because grace is connected to all of this idea of blessings and thanksgiving. Chapter 8 and verse 19, it's used to describe the collection itself. In chapter 9 and verse 8, God is able to make all grace, that is the physical blessings that God can provide, abound unto you. In chapter 9 and verse 14, He says, and by their prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God, that is the spiritual ability that is in you. And then He says in verse 15, grace, thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. Grace. We see it all throughout chapters 8 and 9. And then it culminates there in chapter 9 and verse 15. Grace be unto God for His unspeakable gift. You see, it's the case that our opportunity to give is provided by grace. The reason you have what you have and you can give what you give is because God has provided that opportunity. But it's not only the opportunity to give that's given by grace. The opportunity to serve in the gospel is given by grace. As we read through 2 Corinthians 8 through 10, Paul says, he underscores that grace. And it harkens back to Ephesians 3 and verse 8, in which he says, unto me, who am less than the least of all saints, is this grace given, that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. Grace is the opportunity to serve. It's the opportunity to give. And finally this morning, grace is the opportunity to be saved. We mentioned when we went through the book of Ephesians in our Every Book in a Word study, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. For by grace are you saved through faith. And that not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Grace. This morning, as you think about what's ahead of us, the opportunity to stop for a moment and give thanks. Maybe you'll gather around a table in the next few days. Maybe things will look different than they have in years past. I don't know. But I hope that you can focus on all of the reasons that you have to be thankful. Remember those similarities between giving and living. It's a choice to be positive. It's a challenge to sacrifice. And the more we give, the more we sacrifice, the more readily we can be thankful. I hope we understand the difference between what we can muster up in giving and what God has already given to us. And I hope that over the next few days we compare what we have and what we give to what God gives. And we're impressed by just how much thanks He is due. And I hope this morning we recognize the opportunity before us. You have an opportunity. If you are not a Christian, I hope you understand that there is a very real possibility that this might be the only opportunity you have. I cannot guarantee that anybody here has another. Paul talks about grace so often in his own personal life as the opportunity. Paul recognizes that on the road to Damascus, Jesus Christ met him and gave him an opportunity. He didn't have to, but He did. And Saul made use of that opportunity. He went into the city, he listened to what Ananias had to say, and he was baptized by his direction and had his sins washed away, Acts 22:16. This morning you have an opportunity. And you may not have another. I can't guarantee it. Believe in Jesus Christ, repent of your sins, confess your faith, and be baptized. But dear Christian, as you think about what's upcoming over the next few days, can you smell the turkey, the dressing, the gravy, sweet potato casserole, all of the wonderful things that are upcoming? But dear friend, what is so much more important is that we pause and we reflect on what God has done for us. And maybe it's time to reflect on what we are or are not doing for Him. Maybe like the Corinthians, you had the best of intentions when you obeyed the gospel. But maybe you have not followed through. Maybe you've not lived the faithful life that you promised God you would. You can come back today. We provide this opportunity for you to obey the gospel and be restored as together we stand and sing.